written by Sansa Romance Oracle. Paraloyu, she had been running for 11 days. Nara didn't count the days by sunrises anymore. She counted them by close calls. The enforcer at the Marin Territory checkpoint, who had looked at her travel papers a second too long before waving her through. The inn at Delwick, where she'd heard 2 wolves in the corridor, asking the keeper about a young Omega traveling alone. The river crossing at the Ashford boundary, where she'd gone through the water instead of the bridge, because 2 figures had been watching the bridge from the tree line. 11 days, 7 close calls. 1 destination, the Varden Territory. Every wolf in the northern reaches knew about the Varden Territory and its alpha. Not from experience. Nobody went to the Varden Territory voluntarily. They knew it the way wolves knew about deep water and winter storms. As a fact about the world that required no personal verification. Alpha Drace Varden was the most feared wolf in the northern reaches. Not because of cruelty. The stories weren't about cruelty. They were about something colder than cruelty. Absolute authority. A pack so disciplined it moved like a single organism. A territory so well defended that in 12 years no hostile force had successfully crossed its borders. Nobody went to the Varden Territory. That was exactly why Nara was going. She had spent 11 days calculating options the way a wolf calculates a jump. Measuring the distance, assessing the landing, deciding whether the alternative was worse than the fall. Every option had been worse than the fall except this one. Lord Cassin wanted her back. Not because he cared about her. She had no illusions about that. He wanted her back because an unclaimed Omega who had refused a forced claiming and fled was a statement. A piece of evidence that his authority had limits. In a world where pack law governed everything and Omega rights governed almost nothing, her continued freedom was a problem he intended to solve. He had sent 6 enforcers after her. She had outrun them for 11 days. She wasn't going to outrun them for 12. The sanctuary law was older than Lord Cassin's authority, older than the current pack council. It had been written in the first generation of wolf governance, when the territories were still being carved out and the principle of refuge had been considered worth enshrining in law. Any wolf could invoke sanctuary at any established alpha's territory. The receiving alpha was legally bound to provide protection for 7 days. During those 7 days, no outside pack could legally enter the territory to claim the wolf under sanctuary. 7 days. 7 days to figure out what came after 7 days. Nara crested the final ridge in the pre-dawn dark and looked down at the Varden Territory below. Torches on the walls. Guards at precise intervals. A settlement that looked less like a home and more like a precision instrument. She took a breath. Then she walked down the ridge toward the most feared alpha in the northern reaches and hoped that the law was older than his patience with unexpected visitors. Chapter 1. The Gates. The border guards saw her coming from 100 yards. Nara had expected this. She walked at a steady pace, not running. Running looked like a threat or a panic, and she couldn't afford to look like either. With her hands visible at her sides and her travel papers in her right hand, and the particular composure of someone who had decided that composure was all she had left. There were 4 of them at the main gate. Disciplined, still, watching her approach with the focused attention of wolves who took their position seriously. The tallest stepped forward as she reached the gate. "This is Varden territory," he said. "State your business." "I'm invoking sanctuary," Nara said. "Under Pack Law Article 12. I'm requesting formal protection for the statutory 7-day period." The guard looked at her travel papers, then at her. His expression was professionally neutral, but she could see the calculation running behind his eyes. An Omega, alone, at the Varden gates before dawn, invoking sanctuary. "Wet here?" he said. She waited. She was good at waiting. 11 days had made her very good at it. The guard returned in 4 minutes. She counted, with a senior enforcer and a beta wolf whose bearing marked her as counsel adjacent. The beta looked at Nara with sharp, assessing eyes. "Sanctuary invoking requires disclosure of the pursuing party," the beta said. "Who are you running from?" "Lord Cassin of the Marin territory," Nara said. 6 enforcers. They were approximately 4 hours behind me at the last checkpoint. Something moved in the beta's expression. Not surprise exactly. Recalibration. "Lord Cassin is a council, recognized pack authority," she said carefully. "Yes," Nara agreed, "and his claiming order was filed without my consent signature, which under Article 7 makes it legally contestable." She held the beta's gaze steadily. "I'm not asking for a judgment on the claiming order. I'm invoking sanctuary. Those are different legal instruments." The beta studied her for a long moment. "I'll need to wake the Alpha," she said. "I understand," Nara said. The beta's name, she would learn later, was Soren. She disappeared through the gate. Nara stood in the pre-dawn cold with the 4 guards and the darkness behind her, and the torchlit walls ahead, and counted her breaths. 8 minutes later, the gate opened. The Alpha of the Varden territory walked out, and the 4 guards straightened in a way that was not performance, but reflex. The automatic response of wolves to a dominant presence that had been earned rather than assumed. Nara had prepared herself. She had spent 11 days knowing this moment was coming, and she had used that time to build an internal architecture of calm that she intended to maintain regardless of what she found on the other side of these gates. She had not prepared adequately. Drace Varden was tall in the way that made height seem like a tactical choice. Dark hair, sharp features, gray eyes that caught the torchlight and held it. He was wearing the clothes of a man pulled from sleep. Dark shirt, no formal attire, no authority markers. And somehow this made him more, rather than less imposing. He looked like authority that didn't need costuming. Those gray eyes found her immediately, and something happened in them. It was fast. Faster than she'd ever heard the recognition described. A flash of something vast crossing his expression. There and sealed away in the space of a single breath, replaced by a control so absolute it was almost frightening. Nara's wolf made a sound she had never heard it make before. She sealed it away with everything she had, and held his gaze, and said, with a steadiness that cost her considerably, "I'm invoking sanctuary under Article 12. I have 6 pursuers approximately 4 hours out. I'm asking for 7 days." Drace Varden looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Granted," he said. Chapter 2. The first hour he walked her through the gate himself. Nara noted this. The Alpha of the Varden territory, personally escorting a sanctuary, invoking Omega through his gates at 4 in the morning was not standard protocol. She filed it and said nothing. Beta Soren fell into step on her other side, Nara was aware of being flanked by the two most senior wolves in this territory and found it less intimidating than she'd expected, which was itself information, Drace said. Not a question. His enforcement team or private enforcers? Private, Nara said. 6 wolves. They've been consistent. Same 6 since the Marin border. They're not trying to be subtle. They don't think they need to be, Soren said. No, Nara agreed. They were moving through the settlement now, which was beginning to show the first stirrings of pre-dawn activity. A few wolves up early, pausing to watch the Alpha walking a stranger through the main thoroughfare. Nara kept her eyes forward. The claiming order, Drace said. You said no consent signature. Lord Cassin filed it under an emergency provision that allows claiming without consent in cases of Omega welfare risk. Her voice was even. He specified that I was at welfare risk because I was living without pack protection. A silence. You were living independently, Drace said. Yes, for 3 years. Legally, in neutral territory. She paused. The welfare risk provision was written to protect Omegas in genuine danger. Lord Cassin used it to manufacture grounds for a claiming I had refused through proper channels twice. Twice, Soren said. I filed formal refusals both times. With the regional council. Nara glanced at her. Those refusals are in my documents. Drace said nothing for a moment. They had reached a building that Nara registered as the main administrative structure. Stone. Well, maintained. Warm light inside. You know pack law, he said. I've had reason to learn it, she said. He held the door. She went through. The room inside was a functional meeting space, a table, chairs, a fireplace that Soren was already moving toward to build up. Nara sat where she was indicated and set her documents on the table, in front of her with the efficiency of someone who had been carrying them as her primary defense for 11 days. Drace sat across from her and looked at the documents and then at her with those gray eyes that she was finding it necessary to work at not looking at directly. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. So she did. Chapter 3. What she carries, she talked for 40 minutes. Drace listened without interrupting, which she hadn't expected. She had prepared for questions, for skepticism, for the particular resistance of a powerful wolf being asked to take on someone else's legal problem before sunrise. She had not prepared for complete, focused attention from a man who asked nothing until she was done. She told him about the 3 years in neutral territory, the small settlement she'd built a life in, a healer's practice, a community that had accepted an unclaimed Omega because she was useful, and because the settlement's elder had the wisdom to see past pack convention. The first refusal of Cassin's claiming order, filed correctly through the regional council. The second refusal when the first was ignored. The morning 6 weeks ago, when she'd woken to enforcers at her door, and the welfare provision filing that made her legal status suddenly and completely precarious. She told him about the 11 days, the close calls, the bridges she'd avoided, and the waters she'd crossed, and the inn she'd left through a window at 3 in the morning. She told him about the sanctuary law and why she'd chosen the Varden territory specifically. At this he said, "Why specifically?" "Because nobody crosses your borders without your permission," she said directly. "Because your pack law compliance record is the cleanest in the northern reaches." Because if Cassin's enforcers reach this territory, they'll have to stop at your gates and request entry through official channels, which buys time. She held his gaze. And because the sanctuary law requires the receiving Alpha to provide genuine protection, not just nominal shelter. Your reputation is for doing exactly what your obligations require, completely and without compromise. Something moved in his expression. You researched me. I researched every Alpha in viable range, she said. You are the correct answer. Drace looked at her across the table for a moment. He said, Yes. And you built a practice in neutral territory for 3 years. Yes. Alone. Yes. She met his eyes. I'm aware it's unusual. It's not unusual, he said. It's remarkable. He looked at her documents, the formal refusals, the council filings, the detailed record she'd kept of every legal step she'd taken. You did everything correctly. Yes, she said. And then? Because she had learned that stating facts without performance was the most efficient form of communication. It didn't matter until I got here. The fire had built up properly now. The room was warm. Outside the windows, the pre-dawn dark was beginning to soften at the edges. Drace gathered the documents and looked at Soren. Get the legal team up. I want a response filed with the regional council before Cassin's enforcers reach the border. He looked at Nara. You'll have quarters in the main building. Full access to the settlement during your sanctuary period. Thank you, Nara said. He stood. Then he paused and said, without looking at her, You said you chose this territory because of my reputation for doing exactly what my obligations require. Yes. Now he looked at her. I want you to know that in this case my obligations and my intentions are the same thing. That isn't always true. In this case it is. Nara looked at him across the table in the firelit room, and her wolf made that sound again. The one she had no name for. She kept her expression neutral. I understand, she said. He nodded once and left. Soren showed her to her quarters. Nara sat on the edge of the bed in a room that was clean and warm and secure, and allowed herself, for the first time in 11 days, to breathe completely. Then she took out her documents and started planning for Day 3. Chapter 4. Day 2. She was in the settlement's healing hall by the second morning. She hadn't asked permission. The sanctuary grant gave her full settlement access, and she had woken on the first full day with the particular restlessness of someone whose hands needed to be useful. The healing hall's keeper, a stout older wolf named Barris, had looked at her with open curiosity when she arrived and had become considerably warmer when Nara correctly identified 3 separate preparation errors in the hall's current medicinal stock within the first 10 minutes. You actually know what you're doing, Barris said, with the tone of someone revising their expectations. Nara said, I've been a practicing healer for 4 years. By midday, she had reorganized the storage system and identified a supply shortage that would have become a problem within 2 weeks. By the afternoon, she was treating minor ailments for the settlement wolves who came in with the particular curiosity of a pack assessing an unusual newcomer. She was aware that she was being watched, not threateningly. The Varden wolves were disciplined and courteous in a way that matched their alpha's reputation, but assessed, understood. She was also aware, with the edge of her attention, she kept reserved for important information. that Drace Varden had walked past the healing hall entrance twice that morning without entering. She filed this. On the second pass, she looked up from the supply inventory and met his eyes through the open doorway, and the moment lasted approximately 1 second before he moved on. Her wolf had opinions. She continued ignoring them. That evening, Soren found her in the settlement's small archive, reviewing the sanctuary law provisions with the thoroughness of someone checking their defensive position. He filed the regional council response this morning, Soren said, sitting across from her without ceremony. Formal notification of sanctuary grant. Documentation of Cassin's filing irregularities. Request for independent review of the welfare provision claim. How long for the review? Standard timeline is 10 days. My sanctuary period is 7. Yes. Soren's expression was carefully neutral. He's also filed for a sanctuary extension request on grounds of ongoing legal proceedings. That adds 5 days if approved. Nara looked at the archive table. 12 days total if the extension was approved. Long enough for the regional council review to produce a finding. Cassin will contest the extension, she said. He'll try, Soren said. He'll have a harder time contesting it from outside our border. Nara looked at her. His enforcers haven't arrived yet. They arrived this morning, Soren said, at the southern gate. They were informed of the sanctuary grant and the regional council filing and invited to present any legal counter, filing through official channels. A pause. They're camped outside the southern gate. 6 enforcers camped outside the gate, waiting. How long will they wait? Nara asked. That depends on Cassin's instructions, Soren said, and on what the regional council does. She paused. And on a few other things. Nara looked at her steadily. What other things? Soren met her gaze with the directness of a beta who had decided to say a true thing. He hasn't slept since you arrived, she said. I've known Drace Varden for 8 years. I know what he looks like when he's managing something difficult. She paused. Is managing something difficult? Nara said nothing. I'm not telling you what to do with that information, Soren said. I'm just making sure you have it. She left. Nara sat alone in the archive with the sanctuary law provisions and Soren's information and the sound her wolf kept making, and allowed herself, very briefly, to stop pretending she didn't know exactly what all of it meant. Then she picked up her quill and went back to work. Chapter 5. Day 3. They came at dawn. Not 6 enforcers, 12. Cassin had doubled his team overnight. The report came from the Southern Gate Watch at first light and moved through the settlement with the particular speed that urgent information traveled in a disciplined path. Nara heard it in the healing hall from Barris, who had the expression of someone relaying news they wished they weren't relaying. 12 enforcers, and Lord Cassin himself. He had come personally. Nara set down the preparation she was working on and breathed once and thought clearly about what this meant. Cassin coming personally meant he had assessed the legal situation and decided that presence was more effective than process. It meant he intended to pressure rather than wait. It meant the 7 days, even with the extension, had become less certain. She was still thinking when the door opened and Drace walked in. He looked at her with those gray eyes and said, without preamble, Cassin is at the southern gate. He's requesting a meeting. I know. I'm not going to admit him to the territory, Drace said. The sanctuary grant is valid and the regional council filing is active. He has no legal standing to enter. He'll argue the welfare provision gives him standing. He can argue it to the council. His voice was level. Not to me. Not on my territory. Nara looked at him across the healing hall. Barris had found something extremely important to do in the back room. He'll escalate, she said. If you refuse the meeting, he'll use it as evidence that the sanctuary grant is being used to obstruct a legitimate claiming proceeding. Let him. Drace's eyes were steady on hers. My legal team is filing a counter argument to the welfare provision claim this morning. It's thorough. It addresses every element of his filing. He paused. You built a practice in neutral territory for 3 years. You have a documented community. You have patient records, a business registration, a settlement elder's testimony about your standing. The welfare risk argument is thin, and we're going to make sure the council sees exactly how thin. Nara absorbed this. You did all of this overnight. My legal team did. I told them what I needed, and they worked through the night. She looked at him. At the controlled expression, and the gray eyes, and the man who had not slept since she arrived because Soren had said it plainly. He was managing something difficult. Why? She asked. He met her gaze. Because you invoked sanctuary correctly and my obligations are clear. That's not the whole answer, she said. A silence. The fire crackled. Outside the window, the settlement was moving with the urgent efficiency of a pack that had received news and was responding to it. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her with an expression that was the most unguarded thing she'd seen from him since the gate, and in it she saw exactly what Soren had been telling her without saying it directly. Your wolf, she said quietly. Yes. When I arrived. The moment you crossed the border, he said. Before I saw you. Nara looked at the preparation on the table in front of her. Her hands were steady. She had known this was coming. Had known it since the gate, since his gray eyes had found her, and that flash had crossed his expression. She had spent 2 days building internal walls around the knowledge, and now he was standing in her healing hall, saying it plainly, and the walls were considerably less solid than she'd constructed them to be. I've been running for 11 days, she said carefully. I came here for sanctuary, for legal protection. I need you to know that's why I'm here, not for. She stopped. Started again. I can't make a decision about something that's significant while I'm running. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to. The 7 days are about your safety, he said. Not about anything else. Whatever happens after the 7 days is entirely your choice. I want to be clear about that. She looked at him. This man who had filed counsel responses and mobilized legal teams and stood at his own gate at 4 a.m. and said granted. And who was now standing in her healing hall telling her that the obligation and the intention were the same thing and that the choice was hers. Cassin, she said, returning to the immediate problem with the focus of someone who knew how to prioritize. If he's here personally, he has a plan beyond the legal filing. The shift back to tactics was visible in Drace's expression. A brief adjustment, the acknowledgement of what she was doing and why it was reasonable. Yes, we think he intends to provoke an incident, something that makes the sanctuary look like interference rather than protection. He needs a reason to escalate to the pack council level, Nara said, above the regional council. If he can get this in front of the full council, he has more allies there. I know. Drace looked at her steadily. How do you know that? I spent 3 years studying pack law, she said, and 6 weeks studying Cassin specifically. She pulled a document from her stack. He has 2 pack council members who owe him obligations. If this reaches council level, he calls those obligations in. She set the document in front of him. These are their names. Drace looked at the document, then at her. You've been building a case, he said. Since the first refusal, she said. I always knew the legal route was the only route. I just needed a place to argue it from. She met his eyes. That's why I came here. Something in his expression. The specific quality of a man seeing something clearly for the first time and finding it considerably more significant than he'd been prepared for. Show me everything, he said. She showed him. Chapter 6. The confrontation. Drace met Cassin at the southern gate at midday. Nara watched from the wall. Soren had shown her the position and then positioned herself nearby with the professional neutrality of a beta who was absolutely there for security reasons and definitely not to make sure the Omega under Sanctuary could see the proceedings. Cassin was shorter than she'd imagined from 11 days of running from his name. Broad, well-dressed, with the comfortable authority of a man who had rarely been told no. He stood outside the gate with his 12 enforcers, arranged behind him, and spoke to Drace through the bars with the volume of a man performing for an audience. She couldn't hear the words from this distance. She didn't need to. She could read the shape of it. Cassin presenting his position with the confidence of someone who expected deference. Drace receiving it with the flat attention she'd come to recognize as his most dangerous mode of listening. The exchange lasted 12 minutes. At the end of it, Cassin pointed. At the gate, at Drace, at some invisible point that was probably meant to represent his authority. Drace said something brief. Cassin's expression shifted into something that was not quite fury, but was adjacent to it. Then Drace turned and walked back, toward the settlement, without looking back. Nara came down from the wall as he crossed the main thoroughfare. He saw her and adjusted his direction toward her without breaking stride. His filing an emergency council motion? Drace said. Claiming the sanctuary grant is being used to harbor a wolf in violation of a legitimate pack authority claim. How long for the council to respond to an emergency motion? 48 hours. And the regional council review, still active. 7 days minimum. He looked at her. There's a conflict. Emergency council motion versus active regional review. The question is which takes precedence. Article 12, Section 3. Nara said immediately. Active regional review suspends emergency council motions on the same subject matter until the review concludes. Drace looked at her. I told you I studied, she said. Something happened in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was the closest thing to one she'd seen from him. It arrived briefly and was controlled immediately, and she filed it with considerable care. Article 12, Section 3, he said. My legal team is going to need your documents. They're already organized, she said. I can have them transferred in 20 minutes. Of course you can, he said. And that not quite a smile was back, briefly. She turned toward the administrative building and then stopped. Drace, she said. His name, first time she'd used it. She felt him register it. Yes, thank you. She turned to look at him over her shoulder. Not for the obligation, for the intention being the same thing. He held her gaze for a moment with those gray eyes that she had stopped pretending didn't affect her. Go organize your documents, he said quietly. She went. Chapter 7, Day 5. The Regional Council sent a preliminary finding on Day 5. Nara was in the archive when Soren brought it. A formal document sealed, addressed to the Varden territory, Alpha in his capacity as sanctuary, granting authority. She watched Soren's expression as she read it and learned what she needed to know from that before Soren looked up. Cassin's welfare provision claim is classified as procedurally irregular pending full review, Soren said. The independent reviewer assigned to the case has requested your original refusal filings and the neutral territory documentation. That's favorable, Nara said. Soren set the document on the table. It also triggers Article 12, Section 3. The emergency council motion is suspended. 48 hours of threat. Suspended. Nara looked at the document and felt something she had been holding for 6 weeks shift slightly in her chest. The full review still takes 7 days minimum, Soren said. But with the preliminary finding, Cassin's legal position is considerably weaker. He'll know that, Nara said. He'll try something else? Yes, Soren agreed. We think he'll try to reach you directly. Outside of legal channels, Nara looked at her steadily. He'll approach the enforcers inside the settlement. Soren's expression confirmed it without words. Ooh, Nara asked. We don't know yet. Soren paused. We're watching. That evening Drace found her in the healing hall. She had taken to spending her evenings there. The work of it being something her hands needed, and sat at the preparation table across from her without ceremony. She had noticed that he did this. Arrived without announcement and sat across from her and occupied the space with the particular ease of someone who had stopped needing to justify their presence. She had also noticed that she had stopped finding reasons to leave when he did it. The preliminary finding, he said, Soren told me. How are you? She set down the preparation. This question, the second or third time he'd asked it. She had answered it differently each time as the days had passed and the walls had adjusted. Scared, she said. Because it was true, and because she had decided that honesty was the only thing worth offering someone who had been honest with her from the first hour. Not about Cassin, about what comes after. After the review concludes. After everything concludes. She looked at her hands. I've been running towards something for 11 days. When the running stops, I don't know what I'm running toward anymore. He was quiet for a moment. The fire burned. Outside the window, the settlement had gone to its evening sounds, the particular rhythms of a disciplined pack that felt, after 5 days, recognizable in a way she hadn't expected. You have a healer's practice to rebuild, he said, in neutral territory. Yes, she looked up. Barris has been leaving me alone with the supply inventory for 2 days. I think she's making a point. Something warm in his expression. She's been asking me daily whether the sanctuary period can be extended further. Nara looked at him. Drace, I know, he said quietly. I'm not using it as pressure. I know you're not. She held his gaze. That's the problem. He looked at her with the gray eyes that had found her at the gate and not looked away since and said nothing. Because he was a man who understood that some things required the other person to find the words first. "My wolf has been certain since the gate," she said. "I've been trying to determine how much of what I feel is the bond and how much is." She paused. "The person." And, "It's the person," she said. "The bond is real. But what I've observed over 5 days, the legal team working through the night, Article 12, Section 3. The way you sit across from me without needing anything from me, that's the person." She looked at him steadily. "I've been running for 11 days, and this is the first place that has felt like I could stop." He crossed the distance between them in the way of a man who has been holding still for 5 days and has just been given permission to move. Not rushing. Deliberate, his hand finding hers on the preparation table. "The 7 days," she said, "are yours," he said. "All of them. Whatever you decide." "I've decided," she said. "Nara, I've decided," she said again more clearly. "Not because of the bond and not because of the sanctuary and not because Cassin is outside the gate." She turned her hand under his. "Because of 5 days of watching you do exactly what you said you'd do. That's enough information." He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she recognized now. The one that was all the things he'd been containing since the gate finally being allowed into the room. "The review takes 7 more days," he said. "Minimum?" "I know," she said. "I'll be here." "After the review, I'll still be here," she said. If you want." "Yes," he said, with the absolute certainty of a wolf who had known since a border crossing at 4 a.m. "Yes." Chapter 8. Day 7. Cassin made his move on the 7th day, not through the gates. Through a pack member, a young enforcer named Tev, who had a debt to a Marin territory wolf and had been approached 3 days earlier with an offer he'd almost taken. Almost. He'd come to Soren on the 6th night instead. Nara was in the archive when Drace brought her the information on the morning of the 7th day. Setting it out clearly and without softening the approach, the offer, Tev's disclosure, the counter-operation they'd run overnight. "What was the offer?" she asked. "Get you outside the settlement boundary. Even briefly. Outside the sanctuary boundary, Cassin's enforcers could legally approach you and invoke the claiming order physically." Nara absorbed this. "And Tev came to Soren?" "Last night, yes." He looked at her steadily. "He said he knew what it felt like to have a debt used against you, and he wasn't willing to do the same to someone else." She thought about that for a moment. "What happens to Tev?" "Nothing," he disclosed voluntarily. "That carries its own weight in this pack." Drace paused. "Cassin is going to be informed this morning that his approach to a Varden pack member has been documented and filed with the regional council as evidence of bad faith conduct during active legal proceedings. That strengthens the review case significantly." Nara looked at the archive table. The sanctuary law provisions, the documents she'd been carrying for 11 days, now copied and filed and organized by Drace's legal team into a case she could not have built alone as quickly. "It's the 7th day," she said. "Less. The sanctuary period ends tonight." "The extension was approved," Drace said. 5 additional days. "But," he paused, "I want to be clear that your presence here isn't dependent on the extension, or on the review, or on any legal instrument. He met her eyes. You can stay because you choose to. That supersedes all of it. Nara looked at him. This man who had opened a gate at 4 in the morning and said granted, and had meant it in more ways than the law required, who had filed counsel responses and worked legal teams through the night and sat across from her in a healing hall and asked how she was and meant it, who had told her the obligation and the intention were the same thing on the first night and had spent 7 days proving it true. The extension, she said, 5 days, yes. And after the extension, the review concludes. Hopefully. And after the review, she stopped. I want to rebuild the practice, she said, not in neutral territory. Here, if Barris will have me. Properly. On my own terms. My own work, my own standing. Something in his expression. Barris has been preparing a formal proposal since day 3, he said. She told me not to tell you. She wanted to present it herself. Nara looked at him. She's been planning this since day 3, she said, and I'm quoting exactly, that she hadn't seen preparation work done that well since the previous healer who had been here for 20 years, and that she wasn't letting you leave. Something warm moved through Nara's chest. She looked at the table, and then at Drace, and then at the settlement visible through the archive window. The walls, the morning activity, the wolves moving with the ease of people who lived in a place that protected them. The bond, she said. Yes? I choose it, she said. I want to be clear about that. Not because I'm here, and not because of the 7 days, and not because Cassin is outside the gate. Because of everything I've observed. You're the reason. He came around the table. She stood. Not because of the sanctuary, he said. I need to be sure. Not because of the sanctuary, she confirmed. Because of Article 12, Section 3 and legal teams working through the night, and a man who sat across from me every evening and never once asked for anything. She looked up at him. That's why. He took her face in his hands with the careful deliberateness of a man who had been waiting 7 days and was not going to rush the thing he'd been waiting for. The bond settled between them like the gate closing, not trapping, the opposite. The specific piece of something that had been in motion for 11 days, finally arriving at its destination. Outside the archive window, the settlement went about its morning. The enforcers at the southern gate were still there. The review was still in progress. Cassin's bad faith filing was still being processed. All of that remained. It remained, and it was manageable, and she was not running anymore. Epilogue 30 days later. The regional council's finding arrived on a clear morning. Nara read it in the healing hall. Her healing hall now. Barris having presented the formal proposal on day 8 with the expression of someone who had been waiting for the right moment and had decided that moment was then. The finding was 14 pages. She read all of it with the focused attention. She gave things that mattered. Cassin's welfare provision claim was ruled procedurally invalid. The original claiming order was voided. Her 3 formal refusals were entered into the permanent regional record. A formal censure was issued to the Marin Territory Administration for the bad faith conduct documented during the sanctuary proceedings. 14 pages that gave her back everything she'd built before the running started. And then some. She set the document on the table and breathed. Drace appeared in the doorway. She heard him before she saw him. had learned the specific sound of his presence over 30 days in the way wolves learned the things that mattered. "The finding," she said. "Soren brought me a copy. He came in and sat across from her, the position that had become his position. How are you?" She looked at him. This question that had changed its answer every time he asked it over 30 days. "Finished running," she said, simply. Because it was true, and because it was the whole of it. He looked at her across the preparation table with those gray eyes that had found her at a gate in the pre-dawn dark, and hadn't looked elsewhere since. "Barris wants to expand the supply order," he said. "She says patient volume has increased 30% since you arrived." She mentioned it. Nara turned back to the preparation she'd been working on. I told her to submit the expansion request to the settlement administration formally, with documentation." "Of course you did," Drace said. And there was the warmth in it. The warmth that had been building since day 1 and had stopped being contained somewhere around day 5 and was simply present now, between them, requiring no management. "The council censure on Cassin," she said. "It opens a review of his other welfare provision filings. Yes. There are 3 others under preliminary examination." "I know." She set down her preparation. "I want to submit testimony on the procedural pattern, as a documented case, so the council has a framework for identifying the misuse." He looked at her. "You're building a precedent." Someone shilled. She met his eyes. "There are more cases like mine." He was quiet for a moment. "Soren is going to want to work with you on the submission." "I assumed." She almost smiled. "She's been leaving me case files for a week." Drace leaned forward slightly across the table. "Nara, I know," she said quietly. "I know." She covered his hand with hers, the gesture that had started on day 7 and had become simply the way they were, easy and chosen and entirely her own. Outside the healing hall window, the Varden settlement went about its morning. The walls stood. The gates were closed except to those who approached them in peace or necessity. Somewhere in the regional record, her name was restored. She had stopped running. She had arrived. End of the last sanctuary.